pals, I'm here today to talk about my autumn TBR. Autumn, as with lots of other bookish people, is my absolute favourite time of year. I find that I save books, like all spring and summer, I'll be like, oh, like these would be much better suited to autumn. So I put a lot of books off until the autumn. I read way more in the autumn, and lots of types of books that I really enjoy, I think, suit autumn and winter reading much better. So I just have like so many books I want to try and cram into the next few months, so I thought I would talk about a selection of them here. Most of these I've requested at the library, so I don't have copies yet because I'm on the hold list, but I'm not too far into any of the hold lists that like these won't get to me in the autumn, so hopefully they'll trickle in and not all arrive in one big go, but I do also have a few off my own shelves. So the first group are a group of historical fiction novels. The first one I'm going to mention is like probably one of the most well-known historical fiction novels, which I still have somehow not read, and that is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I've read Once Upon a River by this author a couple of years ago and I really enjoyed it, and ever since then I've been meaning to go back and read The 13th Tale. I feel like this is a book I could absolutely adore, and because of that I don't even really know much about it. Like, I feel like I should know the time period, I don't. What I understand is that a young woman is asked to go and meet a much older lady to write her biography, and so she's being told the story of this older woman's life, but I think perhaps there is a connection between the two women that the like young writer doesn't know about. This is supposed to be like one of the most Gothic novels ever, and yeah, I've just heard amazing things about it, so I'm hoping this could be just like a wonderful like curl up under a blanket with a cup of tea and read one afternoon, although I think it's quite long, so perhaps not all in one afternoon. And then a really recent release, which is also getting a lot of buzz, is Shrines of Gaiety by Kate Atkinson. I've only read one Kate Atkinson novel, and it's the first Jackson Brodie book, and I quite enjoyed it. I feel like if I reread it now, because it was quite a few years ago I read it, I feel like I wouldn't really like it that much. But I've heard amazing things about this author, particularly her book Life After Life, which I do like the sound of. But yeah, I'm very intrigued by Shrines of Gaiety. Now, I've ordered this one at the library rather than buying it because there are a couple of things that are making me a bit like unsure. So, time period, location, massive ticks for me. This is set in 1926 in London. I love books set in the sort of interwar period in London, like one of my favourite like time periods and locations to read about. This is also about a matriarch who has 6 children, and she's trying to like set up all their lives. They're all like really successful and wealthy, which is something I also love the sound of. What like makes me a little bit unsure, and the reason I haven't bought this one, is because this is set like in the nightlife of London. So it says it's predominantly set in like jazz bars, and there's lots of like gangsters and jazz musicians and actresses and all these sorts of things. And I'm just not sure if like that's my vibe. I don't know, I really like when these time period novels sort of, you know, lots of scenes like in the kitchen and stuff like that, and this sounds a little bit more glitz and glam than what I would usually go for, but I'm intrigued enough that I definitely want to read this one and hopefully really enjoy it. And then I have another really recent release, and that is Small Angels by Lauren Owen. I have never read this author before. I think she might have one previous book out. This sounds really good. This is a Gothic novel. It says all the names of the like locales in this book are great, so I'm going to read you this blurb so you can hear them. When Chloe turns the key to Small Angels, the church nestled at the edge of Mock Beggar Woods, where she is to be married, she is braced for cobwebs and dust. What she doesn't expect are the villagers' concerned faces, her fiancé's remoteness, or the nagging voices in her head that whispered her fears she didn't even know she had. Something in the woods is beginning to stir, to creep closer to the sleeping houses, something that should have been banished long ago. Whatever it is, it's getting stronger, and pretending it's not there won't keep the wedding, or the village, or Chloe safe. So yeah, I think this could be like verging a bit more like, I don't know, sounds like it could be a little bit like supernatural, witchy, than like a lot of Gothic novels. A lot of Gothic novels will like allude to things, but like, you know, there isn't necessarily like a supernatural presence. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see where that one will go. And then I do have one that is off my own shelves, and that is Awakening by Stevie Davies. This has like, I think 17 reviews on Goodreads or something. Like, there is barely anyone's read this. This is from a small Welsh publication, or publisher I should say. This is set in Wiltshire in 1860, and this is about 2 sisters. It says this is set the year after Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species was published, which was like obviously like really rocked the world at the time. And it says that the two sisters awakened to a world shattered by science, radicalism, and the stirrings of feminist rebellion. But it says that one of the sisters has this sort of, I think, secret love affair going on, and the other is forced to choose between two men. It says each is riven by inner contradictions, but who will survive when the sisters fall into a fatal conflict with one another? I'm hoping this could be a little bit like Sarah Waters' vibe, like sort of slice of life, you know, Victorian time period. I really like books about families. I think this is going to be quite like dramatic and maybe quite tragic. The cover looks quite foreboding and sort of depressing, doesn't it? But yeah, high hopes for this one. And this next one, I initially like saw the cover and thought, oh, that looks like a sort of historical fiction, maybe Gothic. And I picked it up and it isn't at all, but it sort of feels like it still has those vibes because it's set in like a grand old mansion. But this is a contemporary sort of thriller type novel, which I don't usually read. But I think perhaps this could like border that line of like thriller, murder type thing and like more Gothic mysterious that I do enjoy. So it says that a mother is heading to like meet her husband and her son, but she is like annoyed with them for some reason, and so she like delays seeing them. And then that afternoon her husband and son are found dead on a beach and have been stabbed to death. And it says, we're following this police officer and what she discovers will lead her to Blacklock House, a country mansion long ago converted into flats. Here in the middle of nowhere where a peacock struts the lawn and a fountain plays intermittently, 7 long-term residents have seen more than they should. But this is a community who are good at keeping secrets. It says this is quite like Agatha Christie-esque. I have never read an Agatha Christie novel. I have no idea if I'd enjoy them. I probably should read one. So feel free to recommend me one to read. But yeah, I quite like the sound of this. So again, this is one I've reserved at my library. And then I have a few fantasy books. One of them is like super buzzy at the moment. This is the one I think I'll be waiting the longest for from the library, but will hopefully come to me before the end of autumn. And that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I started her sort of fantasy trilogy and I got like halfway through the first book and didn't love it. But there was elements of her writing I enjoyed enough to give her another chance, and I've heard some people say who like read the trilogy that her writing got much better towards the end, so like they're really excited about this book. This is set in the 1800s in Oxford, and this is sort of like an alternate reality. I think this is going to be a really interesting commentary on colonialism. So this young boy is orphaned in Canton and he's brought over to Oxford to this Royal Institute of Translation. And as part of their translation, I think they have some sort of like fantastical ability to do with silver. And this magic is what has allowed the British Empire to like be as powerful as they are. And yeah, I think he has to like try and fight like dark forces or something. So sounds very intriguing, and yeah, very interested to like read a sort of fantastical novel, but like in a real world setting. I don't feel like I've read loads of them, so we'll be interested to see how this one goes. And the next one is The Book Eaters by Sanyu Dean. This is like a gothic horror type novel, and this is also like our world but fantastical. I think this could even be a similar time period to Babel, but we're following this family who are book eaters, so they live off stories, like they survive by consuming stories, and they're like nearly like died out. And then a new child is born and he is a like mind eater, which means he can consume the souls of human, and his mother is trying to hide what he is because even within their own kind they're like detested, and so yeah, she's trying to like hide who he is and like flee, and yeah, this is supposed to be really like gothic, and yeah, it just sounds really great, so very interested in this one. And then I have 2 fantasy trilogies that I would like to read in the autumn. I really like binge reading a series because I find I have quite a bad memory, and so if I leave like even a few months between a couple of books, I remember like the broad strokes, but like if there's loads of characters, I will have to be reminded about some of them. So I really want to try and binge both of these series in the autumn, and I've been super excited to read both of these series for the last few months, but I've been stopping myself until October because I just feel like they will really suit the autumn months. So the first one is the Bride Chronicles, and the first book is The Dark Mirror by Juliet Marillier. I have all 3 of these already. They are behind me on the shelf just there, but I thought I would just hold up the first one. So I've read quite a lot of Juliet Marillier's books now. Still got quite a few to go though, because she has a really big catalogue, and this is one of her older works that I haven't read yet. And this is actually set in like, I don't even know at what time period this would have been set, like a long time ago, before Scotland was Scotland, basically. And so it's set in that area. Like, all of the books of hers I've read so far have been based on ancient Ireland, so it's going to be interesting to read something based on like what we now know as Scotland, but in like an ancient time. And the premise of this first book, at least, because obviously I don't know what goes on in the next book, so I don't want to spoil myself, is that we follow this young boy who is sent off to like this remote location, and he is raised by this like man who's like super intelligent and is an advisor to the king, and he's clearly being reared to do something of importance, but he doesn't know why. And when he is, I think, around 10, a young baby girl is left on the doorstep, and they don't want to keep this baby girl. They're like, no, like, this is a bad omen, like, we need to, like, you know, find where she's from, or like take her to be cared for by women. But the young boy like says, we 100% have to keep her, like, I think she's a sign of something good. And you sort of follow their story going forwards. Juliet Marillier writes absolutely beautiful fantasy. I think if you're somebody who's like really nervous about fantasy, like intimidated by magic systems, just think that it's completely not going to be for you, then I think Juliet Marillier is a really good place to go to start with fantasy, because she does sort of stand on that line between historical fiction and fantasy. Like, I feel like if you love historical fiction, I'd be so surprised if you don't love Juliet Marillier, because essentially most of her books, there's a slight fantastical element, but like it's really not the core of the books. Like, more is like, I don't know, a pagan belief system and that sort of thing. Like, an awful lot of it you could just say like is their religion, which is what happens in like lots of historical fiction books. But you do also in her books have like the Fey world is real, like there are actually portals into the Fey world. But most of her books take place predominantly in like our world. Nature writing's beautiful, super cosy. There's always like descriptions of like the food they eat, like soups and stews and stuff. And yeah, just feel like I will just love binging this series. And then we have the Memory of Sorrow and Fawn series, which I think is a trilogy, but I think like the third book is so long, it's published in like 2 parts. And the first book is called The Dragonbone Chair. I think I'm going to adore this. This is like old school fantasy. This was published, the first book, in 1988. And it sounds pretty like stereotypical, like quite tropey. We're following this young kitchen boy called Simon. He lives in the royal castle, but he is an apprentice to a member of this like league, and I think he like finds out that like he's super important, which, you know, is pretty tropey, but is what the Fire Trilogy by Robin Hobb is, and I still really love it. And I listened to the first couple of pages of this on audio and absolutely fell in love. You've just been introduced to like the castle. It felt super cozy. It felt like a book I could completely get lost in. I think that once you get into the world, I think this is pretty epic in scale. Like, I think there's like dark forces at work in this world, and we have to sort of follow Simon on this big adventure. I think there's going to be lots of like going on quests and stuff. So I'm just so ready to adore this trilogy, and I feel like I will be so heartbroken if I don't, so fingers crossed. And then I have a few witchy books. Obviously it's going to be October. The first one is The Woman Could Fly by Megan Giddings. Megan Giddings writes like horror novels. I haven't read her previous one, but I heard really good things about it, so if I enjoy this one I will go back and read her first book. And this is being compared to like Margaret Atwood, Octavia E. Butler, because this is like a feminist speculative novel. So we're following our protagonist Josephine, who knows her mother died many years ago, and she's been told loads of different reasons for her mother's death, like she was murdered, she disappeared, she was a witch, and that is the thing she most fears, because in this world like women are like hated, and witches are real, and they're like sought out and like, you know, killed or whatever. And in this world, the state mandates that all women marry by the age of 30 or enrol in a registry that allows them to be monitored, effectively forfeiting their autonomy. And our main character is 28. She's completely ambivalent about marriage. And it's about like her journey in this horrible world she lives in, but also her journey to try and find out what actually happened to her mother. And then I was looking through the list of like what books my library have just purchased, like on my like online account. You can just like click all the new books they've purchased. I saw this cover and I was like, I literally don't care what this is about. I 100% am going to read it. And that is The October Witches by Jennifer Clarkson. This is a sort of middle grade children's novel. This is for 8 to 12-year-olds. It looks absolutely adorable and just cannot wait. It says, there's so much to love about October: Halloween, pumpkin everything, and magic, especially magic. But for nervous young witch Clemmy, this October might see the stars descend on her for the first time, bringing with them a whole month of chaotic new power. She spent 12 years watching her mum, aunts and cousin receive their October power, and knows that, for the Merlins, magic can get very messy. And there are those who want to harness their magic and make it last beyond October. It's a bold experiment until Clemmy and her coven find themselves in mortal danger. What price must be paid for magic that never ends, or for having magic at all? I love the sound of that. I'm just going to read that on like a Sunday afternoon with like a cup of tea and be really happy. And then this one's a bit like left field for me, but I will explain the reason where I got like pulled in. So this is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This is like a cosy romance, okay? Now I have read a few romance novels, but I have never read a romance novel that is like slightly supernatural and like super like, this is supposed to be like really heartwarming, like twee. So I feel like it could be a bit too cheerful for me, but it is about witches. I do like that cover, and it's set in Norfolk, which is where I live. So that's basically why I've given in and decided to read this one. So let's hope this isn't like too sugary sweet for me. We're following this woman who's one of the last witches in England, and she gets invited to teach 3 young witches at a really remote house in Norfolk. And when she gets there to teach them, there is a like really moody man there who is the librarian, and a joyous romance ensues. So house in Norfolk, witches, library, yes, I want to read it. So we shall see. Hopefully I enjoy this one. And then I have 4 more novels. These are all family dramas, literary fiction family dramas, but I feel like these will really suit being read in the autumn. The first one is Celeste Ng's new novel, Our Missing Hearts. I didn't read her second novel, but I did quite enjoy her first, and I just really like the sound of this one. We're following a 12-year-old boy called Bird, who is looked after by his father, who is a librarian, and they live in America, where children of dissidents, particularly of Asian origin, can be taken from their parents to sort of try and stop them being like radicalised. And our protagonist's mother was a Chinese American poet, and a lot of books are banned in this world, and her books is one of those books that are banned. And she left when he was a really young boy, and he like doesn't know where she is, and so he goes on this journey when he receives a mysterious letter containing only a cryptic drawing. He goes on this quest. It says his journey will take him through the many folk tales she poured into his head as a child, through the ranks of an underground network of librarians, into the lives of the children who have been taken, and finally to New York, where a new act of defiance may be the beginning of a much needed change. So yeah, this one just sounds like really interesting. Really interested to see like the sort of adventure he goes on, and yeah, have high hopes for this one. And then the last few are books I own. This is Amy and Lan by Sadie Jones. I mean, this cover is super autumnal. This opens in autumn 2005. The first few pages are like all about the weather, and they're glorious. And this is set in this like small community, I think on a farm, where I think 2 or 3 families come together. We're following Amy and Lan, who think they're having like this wonderful childhood growing up in the West Country on this farm. But it says the children are learning like all their own things, but the adults are far too busy to keep an eye on Amy and Lan, and Amy and Lan would never tell them about climbing on the high barn roof or what happened with the axe that time, any more than their parents would tell them the things they get up to. Adult things like betrayal that threaten to bring the whole fragile idyll tumbling down. I think I could really enjoy this one. I read the first few pages, like I said, really enjoyed the writing style. I love sort of coming of age stories about children, but I do like when they have that edge of like you fearing that something is going to happen, and so you sort of read the whole novel with this building sense of dread. I feel like this is what this novel is going to be, so I'm very excited about it. And then I love reading Indigenous novels from Canada. I just think they have some amazing authors there, and they publish some really, really amazing books. And I try to read those books in the autumn and the winter, just because lots of parts of Canada tend to be like a lot colder than where I live, and also a lot of these books are set in like more remote locations, and so they just feel like they really suit this time of year. And also, if you didn't know, Indigathon is usually held in November, so like keep your eyes peeled on YouTube to see if that is announced soon, because that's always a really fun thing to participate in, and get loads of amazing recommendations for Indigenous and Aboriginal authored books, which are like amazing. So the two I have are Five Little Indians by Michelle Good. This tells the story of 5 friends who all grew up together, I think in residential schools. They were all taken from their families and raised there. And when they finish school, they're just like released with no money, no connections. They just have to make their own way in the world. And you follow them for the subsequent years as they sort of come in and out of one another's lives, and you see the like devastating effect their childhood in this horrific residential school had on them. This is like super celebrated. This has amazing reviews. I feel like I'm going to absolutely adore this book. I've had this for quite a few months now, but like I said, I've been saving it to read. I don't know, the cover just looks really wintry. I don't even know if this is a really like autumnal or wintry book, but I just feel like I want to read it this time of year. So there is that. And then lastly, and perhaps the most beautiful novel I'm going to talk about today, is The Strangers by Katharina Vermette. This is a companion novel to The Break, which is a book I absolutely adored. So you can read them in any order. Basically, some of the secondary characters in The Break become primary characters in this book, and vice versa. I'm planning on rereading The Break first, just because I adored it. So The Break is about a family of women, and one of the young members of the family suffers like a pretty brutal attack, and it is about how the community view this attack and how the women in this family pull together to get through it, and you see the novel from all their different perspectives. If you want to read a book that really comments on like intergenerational trauma, but like the power of women and how like women working together can just like build this beautiful life, then like highly recommend The Break, although it is like a very upsetting book. And I think this will be the same. This again is following this family who are the Strangers, I think a mother and her 2 daughters, and each of them are on like different paths. One of the daughters goes to live with her estranged father, and she's really missing her mother and sister, and she's trying to cope with that. Phoenix is pregnant with a baby, but she gives birth to them in a youth detention centre, and she feels like she's never going to get the chance to raise her baby. And Elsie, the mother, is struggling with addiction and determined to try and turn her life around and reunite with her daughters. And you're watching the 3 of them on these journeys. I just feel like this is going to be a 5-star read because I absolutely loved The Break, like I said, and she just writes beautifully. So I'm so excited about this one. Those are all the novels I plan to read this autumn, or I obviously would like to read more than that, but those are the ones that are the most like seasonally focused out of all the books I would like to read. So I'd love to know if you've read any of these, and if you have, what your thoughts were on them. I'd also like to know if you plan to read any of these books, and also always want to know what seasonal reads you have planned, if you have any. So do let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!